Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we can get our panelists to come over. So, uh, Kirsten, Tolika, and Johan to join us here on the stage. Um, Maybe I just give a brief introduction to myself as we get started. So, my name is Gilbert, and I'm the strategic lead for the Frontiers Planet Prize. So, for those who don't know the prize, it's the largest scientific competition that looks in planetary health. And its mission is to mobilize the academic community, make it compete at the greatest scale of excellence, to first of all diagnose the health of our planet, but at the same time propose transformative solutions to get us back into a safe operating space. We were launched in 2022, and the outputs of this is that we have three winners each year, each of whom win $1 million to invest, scale up, and amplify the impact of their work. So if you'd like to know more, I've left a couple of brochures and you're welcome to get in touch. But I'm here today to talk about the 10 Emerging Technology Planetary Health Reports, which got published in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. And I'm happy to share that we have Helen Burdett, who is online with us, who will be talking through this report with us. And the goal of this is to share what are the 10 emerging technologies that we need that can bring us back into a safe operating space. And it looks at a number of different innovations. So I'm not going to go through all of them. I invite you to scan the QR code and download. And it looks across clean energy, innovations in novel materials, agriculture, methane capture and storage, and also Earth systems diagnosis. And all of them have the solution that have been touted to potentially address and mitigate key human drivers of planetary boundary transgressions. So what's really important to provide some context about this report, the World Economic Forum has been publishing the 10 Emerging Technology report for the past 13 years. And this is the first time that they publish one specifically on planetary health. And we work with... Is this working, the clicker? Okay, he's going to click the next one. So we've worked in partnership with the World Economic Forum, and they bring together their expert groups from the Global Future Council, and that's led by Helen. And it's in partnership with Frontiers and the Frontiers Planet Prize, where Fred Fenter, our Chief Executive Editor, represents Frontiers. We have Martin Siegert, who is a jury member of the prize, also a Chief Editor. And he is leading the steering committee in doing the analysis and assessments of all the nominations that came in, with Johan representing the jury of 100 who put the forward together and shows the importance of these technologies. So the process of how these technologies were put together was very similar as they've done for the 10 emerging technologies. We sourced loads of nominations from the Planet Prize community. So that's the jury members, the champions, and also the expert group of partners within the World Economic Forum. And if you click the next slide, please. And we have a steering committee where we have Kirsten Dunlop joining us here today, who will who basically take all of the shortlisted nominations and technologies, selected the top 10, and looked during their assessment at the most important thing in terms of scale, depth, and impact. And here are the 10 technologies. The thing which is extremely important, they're all mapped to the Planetary Boundaries Framework. So it has to be interrelated. And because obviously we know that technology does not... Hello? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And as we know that technology cannot sit in... Oh goodness me, sorry. Sit in silos. They have to sit within a broader shift of governance, policy, and finance transformations as well. And that's what's really important to find whether there is a make or break deployment of these technologies. And this is what we'll be discussing today with the panelists, looking at the innovation, how we can enhance our environmental intelligence, but also how these technologies can also contribute to positive global tipping points, as we've heard before with Tim Lenton and the rest of the group. So I'd like to now get started. We can invite the panelists on stage. So first up, I would like to invite online, if we can see her, we have Helen Burdett, who is the head of technology for Earth. If we can see and hear her. She's joining us from Switzerland, so hopefully.
Hello, I'm here. I don't know if you can see me, but hello all.
Not yet, we can hear you perfectly. Nice to see you, Helen. So a few notes of what Helen does. So she works at the nexus of nature, climate. Oh, there we are. Yes, we can see you. Hi, Helen. Hello. She works at the nexus of nature, climate, and technology at the World Economic Forum. And her work bridges the organization's Center for Frontiers Technology and the Center for Nature and Climate. And she's been the driver of the report, so a warm welcome. Next up, I'd like to invite Kirsten Dunlop on stage, who is the CEO of Climate Kick. Yep. You can just sit next to me here. So Climate Kick is Europe's largest public-private partnership focused on climate innovation. And we look forward to learning about your experience in catalyzing systemic transformations with your career that's spanned consulting, academia, and a lot more. So, a warm welcome, Kirsten. I'd like to also invite our second panelist, Ambassador Celie Thompson, who is the Barbados ambassador to Brazil and is a social justice advocate and an avid diplomat who also does a lot of education work. So a warm welcome to you. And then last and not least, Johan, who needs no introduction, so I'll just mention he's here to represent the technologies that came through from our champions and from the jury of 100. And what I'd like to do with this hour is essentially have a discussion. I'm going to ask an open question because we don't have a lot of panels talking about technology here. Technology, I know, is highly contentious. We know that it has to sit in a whole gamut of changes that are needed, and this is the deep dive that we're going to be addressing today. So I'd like to start off with an open question for each of you, 5 minutes each. And then afterwards we'll go into some specific questions, and I'd love to engage with everyone in a Q&A. But before we do that, I have to acknowledge how Helen has been the driving force for this report. So a huge thank you for doing that. So my first question, actually, to set the scene, Helen, maybe, why did the World Economic Forum decide to publish a 10 emerging tech report in Planetary Health in collaboration with Frontiers? And specifically on Planetary Health and getting us into a back safe operating space. And what do you aim to achieve in doing so? So over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here with these excellent panelists. I think maybe first I would provide a little bit of context. For the past 14 years, the Forum has been publishing a Top 10 Emerging Technologies report. And it's something that we have found to be very well received as a foresight mechanism to look at what's coming. And some of them maybe we don't hear much about in years later, and others become major technologies that have impacted whole sectors and industries. And this is the first report where we've really focused on a core challenge. And I think to this group, I probably don't need to justify why planetary health is the most important challenge that we would focus on and we would look at here. And I think the other piece of that is through the partnership that we have with Frontiers and the Planet Jury and the ability to bring in the expertise that would be needed to evaluate the net impact that technologies could have, not only looking at what their promise might be, but really the steering committee dug into where would the potential risks be as well. And so we moved from focusing on discrete technologies, as we do in the Top 10 Emerging Technologies report, to expand it out into technology solution spaces. So we look actually at the top 10 solution areas that technologies have the greatest impact to influence in a net positive way.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. So I think that frames the discussion quite nicely. So to open up with each of you, how can emerging technologies meaningfully restore planetary balance in the broader sense? So maybe I'll start off with you, Kirsten.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I'm speaking from the perspective of being an organization that, if you were to take, we're 15 years old, if you were to take a Netflix analogy, we're in season 3 of our existence. In season 1, was a period where we were flooding the world with solutions. We were really funding hundreds and thousands of solutions to ensure that we could build the field of climate entrepreneurship, and we were working heavily on education. Season 2 for us and Season 3 was a gear shift, a fundamental pivot, because we were concerned when we looked at those solutions that they would not be capable of changing industries, nor constructing new economics and a sustainable planet human system to ensure planetary balance. So my perspective is very strongly informed by our work in trying to understand how to achieve systems change in the real economy with technology solutions as part of a key part of that. And so I think 5 points would be relevant specifically to how this notion of meaningful change, meaning that it's not about just feeding capital markets for some new bright shiny thing that still iterates on the same broken system of extractive wealth creation for a very few people, but that these are solutions that feed a change of human design for life that is balanced inherently and intertwined with the planet. So that means they need to anticipate needs, human needs, and an entanglement between human and planetary needs, and they need to anticipate changed conditions. 50-degree heat, very different storm patterns, very different conditions for food and water systems. So we need to have solutions that are really emerging, not just in new to us, but capable of dealing with the emergent properties of the world we are unfortunately facing. The second is that they need to be solutions that are inherently capable of thinking in systems, led and designed and conceived of by people who are thinking in systems. So that means they need to be able to think about positive feedback loops. If it's energy systems, I was responsible for modular geothermal as one of the technologies included in this report. They need to be able to think about what that means as a paradigm shift. Modular geothermal is energy democracy. It shifts fundamentally a lot of our core paradigms around energy as a centralized provision at lowest cost, the maximum tariff, and those who can least afford pay the most. So shifting that systems view is incredibly important. The third is to be open and ready and aware and able to partner and join up as pieces of a puzzle so that the combinatory effects of multiple technologies form larger wholes whose outcome is greater than the sum of the parts. And that means individual entrepreneurs and solutions that are actively looking for almost like open API mindsets for how they join up with other solutions to form a more effective, for example, interoperable energy system. So modular geothermal needs to be part of an entire principle of energy, for example, energy systems that are decentralized and distributed. The fourth, is designing from scale from the beginning. I think one of the biggest challenges we see in the way in which solutions are developed is that they're very often designed for this pilot logic. Design small, get your mouse strike right, go to market, see if you can scale. We need to be scaling from the very, very beginning. And that means the fifth point is these are solutions that need to be involving their end beneficiaries, and not just end part, but also governments and policymakers in their development, co-development, and co-design, which is non-trivial because it's not being one of technology's development's happy spaces, but it is essential.
So I will introduce myself again just to contextualize the place in which I'm going to speak. I am Barbados' ambassador to Brazil. I am joined by also our climate ambassador who's in the audience, and I think I want to say this to you because we take wherever we are seriously, whatever question as a platform to make many points about where developing countries, small island states sit in terms of our perspective on these topics. And today we're talking about technology, which is great, and I first wish to congratulate all of you on your work with this report. Encourage you to look at the report. But some of you, in fact most of you would probably have more experience than me at COP, but you would know that the voice of small island developing states and developing countries is one that needs to be heard. You would know that my Prime Minister and other advocates like my ambassador speak and defend and bring different perspectives about what small island states and developing countries, where we sit in relation to technology. So I would like to just reel back a little bit, and many of you might be aware of the Bridgetown Initiative And that's how we look at this. We look at problems related to climate and especially climate finance through this lens. The Bridgetown Initiative is not a specific project, but a set of ideas, a set of proposals that come together to do one thing, or to do a few things, but the main thing is to ensure equity and access. There's a need for more money, but it has to be equitable and it has to be fair access. And that's the first opening message that I want to make to you. So when we read a report, and it's a great report that has solutions in it, the first thing we are thinking as small island states and developing countries is how to get it. Will we just be another testing bed? Because oftentimes the technology is deployed in our spaces, but then when the money for the project runs out, we're left in the lurch. And what I want to pass as a message is from the beginning, as my colleague just said, we need to think about access and think about scale. And beyond that, we are not testing beds and testing grounds, but we are co-collaborators. We can be laboratories for the production of solutions as we implement and test in these countries. We also need to be creating solutions together for scaling them up, exporting them, getting into the hands of other people who face the same vulnerabilities that we do. We don't come to climate saying that we're climate strong. We're climate vulnerable all day, every day. You could wake up, find a hurricane, or your sea island with the water hotter than it was before. You can find the seashore not even there where it used to be, and it's gone. So the first thing I want to say, and the main thing I think if I say nothing else, is that small island states, developing countries, these places who are usually recipients of technology should be thought of as co-creators, testers, laboratories for this new technology. The Bridgetown Initiative talks about access to finance, and that goes with a broader set of proposals around the reforms that need to be made so that the finance can actually get into the hands of the people that are currently disadvantaged by the systems that provide the finance. And so we're talking about reform of the global financial architecture, but we're also talking about the fact that there are many things that can be done now with the right political will to change. And there are many success stories from the Bridgetown Initiative that I don't want to go into here, but I would encourage you to learn and read together with this report. And if you remember anything that I've said today, read with the memory of what I've said, which is this has already changed, must be equitable, must be fair, and it must be scalable, which means we can think about this now. So as you've launched this report, you're not waiting to go, hey, let's see where to deploy the methane abatement technology, which I'm happy to see. But let's think now about how this urgent action can be done through the lens of small island developing states and developing countries as partners. There's too much, if I can say, the sort of disingenuous, we were talking about it before, a sort of disingenuous divide between what is developed implementation and what is developing implementation. And if we don't stop it, we're just going to keep producing the same inequitable results. And so my key message is that. My key message is how can we think of our countries, our partners, these partnerships in real terms, and stop thinking about small and developing spaces as places where you send to. This is an injustice. I don't want to say the word too much. But we've come to the point where we can't pretend anymore because we're literally disappearing. Right? It's not something that's nice to have. This is existential for us. There are hurricanes happening, and my ambassador sat with France, UK, who else? China, to talk about methane abatement and the urgency of methane abatement. All of us on the same page as partners talking about this thing. And what needs to be done with the technology is to ensure that it responds to the urgencies that we have identified, whether it's where they need to be deployed, like methane abatement, or how they need to be deployed, such as access and an ending to the let me find the right words as a diplomat, an ending of the injustice of it not being equitable.
I think that's probably one very good aspect of the report. It has a very strong focus on impact and scale through the lens of governance, policy, and equity. So thank you very much, Donica. Before I go to Johan, Helen, I'd love to hear from the World Economic Forum's perspective about the importance of these emerging technologies in restoring planetary health. Would you like to say a few words?
So I think sort of beyond the forum's perspective alone, I think it's important to note that all IPCC scenarios that lead us into the future include technology. All of them include many technologies, from improving intelligence in terms of what data we can use, to even technologies that help pull down carbon and pull down methane and lead us toward a restorative future. And so we have to be very cautious with how we implement, how we develop, how we prioritize. And so I think that it's not an uncomplicated question how to prioritize these, but I think what is uncomplicated is that technologies have a role to play, and technologies will play a role. And it's our job as leaders, it's our job as humans to use them as a tool. So they can be a tool to help make us more intelligent. They can be a tool to help power systems that have other ends, and they can be catalysts for change. So I think something that is frequently discussed at COP is the need for change, the need for systemic and structural change. And historically, we've seen technologies play a huge role in helping to instigate that change and create a flywheel for change that can be seen as unstoppable. And that can be scary, and that can have hugely negative impacts if not shaped appropriately, if not shaped equitably, and if not shaped for all and for all of humanity. And so I think you look at everything from the wheel to the printing press to email to our smartphones, technology is impacting the way humans live on Earth. And so when we think about these technologies, I think we need to think about how can we use them as tools? How can we look at developing technologies so that they help us interact with our planet in a way that can maintain its health, but also lead us back toward a path toward planetary health?
Great, thank you very much, Helen. And I wanted to kind of dovetail on that, and maybe for you, Johan, just be a little bit more kind of poignant in the question here. It's something that also, as a jury, leading the jury of 100s at the Frontiers Planet Prize, there is always a discussion about how can you assess technologies and scale it in a way where you can actually see it driving this change. And it does make things a bit difficult when we want to say, okay, if you want to go and deploy a new technology, how does that stack up with a grander systems change which could employ nature-based solutions or a complete shift in consumption patterns? So the question I'd like to ask you based on this is, we don't want to have these technological breakthroughs being considered as silver bullets. Because when you do so, then you're justifying continuing the status quo. There are no structural changes. There are no incentives to change. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. How does technology play into wider systems transformations?
Thanks, Gilbert, and a lot of really good insights have already been shared here by Kirsten and Helen. But just to say that I share the conclusion that technologies are essential. And in addition, which is quite remarkable when it comes to the evidence we have today, we also know that technologies for abatement, even of the difficult to abate sector, is no longer a theory or some kind of piloting conceptual proposition. We have solutions both for the steel industry, for aluminium, for the fertilizer industry, even for aviation. We can do cement. We can do essentially all the sectors, even the difficult to abate sector. So there's actually no excuse even to go to absolute zero very fast. But there's also no scientific evidence that suggests that technology can do this alone. And the reason for that are several. I mean, one is, of course, just the fact that we're running out of time. As Monica points out, we are at a crisis point. We have literally just a few years to turn this around and a few decades to have a safe landing. If we don't succeed with that, we'll press on button for irreversible changes that we cannot turn back from. So it is truly existential. And the only way to get systems changes at scale in all the moving analysis and analytics we have is always a combination between technology, policy, and behavioral change. And the policies, generally, which probably those of you who follow some of the sessions here today, must be a portfolio of different policy measures, and that the most efficient ones tend to be those that are hard policy measures, where you put, for example, an end date on the internal combustion engine to a certain timeline, not having just economic incentives or taxes or subsidies, but help technologies with brave, hard policy measures. And that requires science as well, because you need to have research on effective policy measures and institutional arrangements to be able to have policies that are not only effective, but that can be scaled also at the global level. Because one of the biggest problems we have today is that, as you've seen on climate negotiations, it's not enough if you have, as today, 40 countries running a price of carbon if everyone else is not running a price of carbon, because that creates just a leakage and tremendous uproar in those economies that feel penalized by having to pay more unnecessarily when everyone else is subsidized. So that is why technology and policy and behavioral change come together. But let me just have one final reflection on this, Gilbert, which I think can frame a bit why technology may be more important than the technology itself. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's take Amazon, for example, where 90% of the deforestation is illegal. It's driven by corruption, it's driven by populism, it's driven by undemocratic signals into the system. Why are people doing this? Why are people destroying the very life support base for the entire nation? Well, it's because they don't see it as any alternative. So you need to create economic and social alternatives that can attract the behavior away from damage. Now, how do you do that? Well, you do that with technologies. And we see that is why we have S-curves of exponential rise on electrification of mobility, of solar voltaics, of electrification, of moving away from coal-driven electricity to solar panels in South Africa and other parts. You have an S-curve across African economies on renewable energy for the simple reason that it's cheaper, it's smarter, and it's economically interesting. And I think we have to see technology also as part of the social feedback to accelerate system change. So technology plays two roles. It's not a silver bullet, but it kind of reduces emissions, but also can help create the right, demand among us as consumers as well.
Thank you very much. I think there's a really important point there about the technologies being a way to also drive societal changes as well. And I'd like to bring you back in here, Kirsten, because I think what you do at Climate Kick is a really great manifestation of how you can redesign and finance these systemic transitions. And if we look at, we discussed before your contribution to the chapter on modular geothermal energy and how it's extremely cost competitive. It gives you energy access and it has extremely low carbon footprints. Yet there's still challenges around its deployments. So I'd like to hear a bit more about these challenges specifically for this technology. And also from that, what do you think are the key conditions of these technologies that are needed to allow them to scale at city level, regional level, and globally?
Very much. Modular geothermal is one example that's just a little entry point for some of those key conditions. It means literally a pipe in every house coming up from the Earth's core, and then heat pumps that mean that you can circulate that energy. So you literally, when I say energy democracy, what it means is that you literally have energy below. The most cost-effective and largest scale implementation available was bought by a company I won't name, who shut it down because it is too competitive to a core energy model that is based on centralized control and the tariffing mechanism that mean that significant profits can remain. And that company is in renewables. So this opens up a whole question on how we think about the way in which we transition in ways that are indeed, as you're rightly saying, not just about the technology, but about the entire political economy of transition. I think our learnings as an organization working with very large-scale place-based transition, so we are leading an initiative in Europe that has 112 cities committed to decarbonize by 2030, and we're talking Madrid, Rome, Paris, Amsterdam. This is non-trivial and incredibly difficult. Here you really need a few things that are going to be mission critical. The first, for example, is this question of scale. What pulls these kinds of technologies through the scale, especially in the context where you have national governments that are simply not doing what we need in terms of very hard-coded aligned policy? Well, there is one real possibility that we are observing, and that is to align the interests of industry and small and medium at large and small and medium enterprises with the interests of cities and regions. So to make common cause. It's not easy, but it is possible, because both actually desperately need large-scale demand, clear directional signals for that, the stable conditions to operate in aggregate. So when you start adding up the demand that all cities in Europe, for example, have for energy transition, you begin to have market signal that industry can plan for and can really begin to put capital behind and actually grow a real economy. Now in Europe, this is where this starts to get interesting. When you do the math, because you have very structured data coming out of this Big Cities program, Europe does not have access to the metals needed to electrify in the way in which everybody is assuming we're going to go renewable. So you're going to have modular geothermal. But that changes the entire energy paradigm. So in effect, what we need is the kind of lead market structuring and spatial energy planning that allows us to think about a form of managed commodity trading for different energy solutions. And this is where these technologies really come into play. But the conditions to allow them to scale is to think like that, is to think about spatial energy planning at large scale and feed different solutions in. The second key condition is interoperability. We need solutions to be at least 80% capable of servicing needs across the whole board. There are deep specificities, but they don't need to be 80%. They can be 20, 10, 5, and often it's a process question or logistics or an implementation mechanism. So that designing for that from the beginning, thinking about how that works, that then goes to the interoperability of incentives. And here particularly tools like tax, and including local taxes in cities and regions. You've got a lot of capital pools in cities and regions that are not actually being used to incentivize the way in which these technologies get deployed. There are sleeping giants like insurance. If you start to turn around the value at risk that we are living with, and you think about the window of insurability closing down to nothing within our lifetimes, reversing the risk of that and saying, so let's take all of those insurance policies of energy systems, infrastructure, transport and buildings, and think about releasing 1 or 2% of those assets, those premium portfolios, to accelerate the managed transition and acceleration of technology that will provide stable, resilient alternatives. So these kind of financial tools that can operate at a subnational scale and help cities and regions move fast and adopt. And then the last couple of principles from our perspective, I spoke about multi-use before. The need for any single one of these solutions to be able to simultaneously solve a number of things. So modular geothermal and heat pumps needs to be able to solve a number of other questions about both heating and cooling, digital infrastructure in homes that is solving energy efficiency, and for the integration or bidirectional charging of energy solutions in them to the grids, needs to be able to be connected up with health, because it's the same infrastructure we need for in-home healthcare for aging populations. So this kind of notion of multi-use, multi-purpose, interoperability is critical for scale to happen. And the last two are, we are describing a world as if the solutions are there, the capital is there but not aligned, policy is not holding in a national level but subnational, maybe out of proxy with standards and radical collaboration, but we do not have skills. We are desperately short of skills. The last two largest wind contracts were not fulfilled because nobody has the skills to maintain them. And the robots keep falling off 100-meter high wind tunnels. So we have really big, we need to start thinking 3 steps ahead. Who is going to install, maintain modular geothermal and make sure that works? And that leads me very much to the point that you made. If you think about the metaphor for what we're doing, we understand that if you want to water a tree and plants to make it really grow, you water the roots. But we design technologies for the fruits, for the people who can afford to pay the most. Why? We need to design. So what does modular geothermal, for example, as one technology look like as the most affordable, least cost option that would genuinely enable hundreds of thousands of families suffering from energy poverty to live better? When we get it that way, it will scale.
That's a very, very rich response. Thank you very much, Kirsten. I think there was one part about the financial levers there, which we really have to dig in there. And Tonik, I'd like to hear from you on this specific point, right? The financial barriers and the governance that comes around this. What kind of procurement innovations have you seen in small island states or even Barbados, where you can see these technologies being co-developed, and you're not just a consumer and a test ground, as you say, and you can actually deploy them, and it works extremely well.
Well, I mean, there's a lot in your question. I'd like to parse it into what we're doing in Barbados. I can give examples of, but I really want to pick back up on this, the importance of finance and what needs to happen at the root level. I would let's imagine finance as the water for the root level that gets the technology. I can talk to you about the fruit using this metaphor, but if you don't mind, I just want to make some points about, some simple points in fact, about watering those roots. And I want to go into something that Kirsten said and something that was said at a ministerial roundtable yesterday by the Mayor of Adelaide, and to bring in how the mindset, the behavior change that I think is actually behind the Bridgetown Initiative and other innovations that I would like to say is coming out of small islands, developing countries, not working with and only with themselves, but with the best minds and best intentions in the world. Bridgetown Initiative doesn't come from Bridgetown and is only for Bridgetown. It is so named because it happened in Bridgetown. But a lot of people came together, like, so you understand, people who are scientific experts, finance experts, they came together to come up with that initiative. And it's about how to make access to finance real. And one of the mindset truths that Bridgetown carries, which is something that you said and the Mayor of Adelaide said, is the money is there. The idea of the scarcity of money is false. But what we need to do is treat to the access to the finance, how it works. How is it possible to have a rule that tells Jamaica that you've just had a hurricane and you're trying to build, I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of homes back, but you have to take the money at the 15 and 20% that it's loaned to Jamaica for absolutely no reason, other than that's the category of loan that they can get. How can you tell a Jamaica that it needs to take another loan to refinance and that insurance is a foreclosed opportunity? How do you tell the private sector that there's nothing to be gained from assisting in so I think the mindset shift and the behavior changes for all of us, everybody, to understand and to eliminate the idea of scarcity of finance and to recognize that it's about making this finance less punitive. It literally is punitive. It is punitive. It's not even unfair. I don't even get to the word unequitable, right? It's actually punitive. So the first thing is let's do everything we can to ensure that it is accessible. And another thing that the Mayor of Adelaide said, that you said, and that we are saying, and you are saying, is how do we make this legible to the private sector? How do we make this legible to somebody going, wait, if I take this loan from the IDB, and the IDB is able to borrow at 2%, and then I'm able to give a loan that is 6%, but that's better than the 22% that Jamaica might get. How do I leverage that? How do I, there's another nice word that we use in finance, hedge against the risks of things, and how do I eliminate the myth of the risks? And we know that there are ways in which financing are used, or companies make decisions that look as though they're going to help, only to shut things down. How do we ensure that we have mechanisms to monitor? How do we ensure that we have mechanisms to review? How do we ensure that we have mechanisms to say, well, we've tried these, we can actually do something different at this phase? So the monitoring, the evaluation has to also take into consideration that we're starting from an unequitable place. Don't reproduce what we've been doing so far. It needs to stop. There's no way that we can look at ourselves in 2025, look at ourselves in the mirror with all we know, with all what the intelligence. I'm sure if you say, hey, the artificial intelligence, this is what's going on. The artificial intelligence, so, but that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. right? It wouldn't take a machine a long time to understand what needs to happen at the level of access. So finding money and redefining how money is used is one of the basic principles of the Bridgetown Initiative, which is our fruit, right? One of our fruits is how do we think differently about where the money is? How do we make sure that we can repurpose it? We repurposed and advocated for SPRs. We advocated for different rules for different funds for climate mitigation. And we're advocating for the urgency to be embedded in all of these systems of monitoring and evaluation. You cannot have a report or a system that says we're going to give you money, but we're going to take 24 and 48 and 36 hours and it's okay. All I want to know is how many workshops you did. Right? You want to know how many lives it saved. And we need to define those outcomes better. There are too many. I've worked with many funds that define outcome without monitoring and evaluation based on what was done by the consultant on the ground. Not how it impacted people's happiness and lives and fairness. So the other thing I want to say, just to say to close, is I started in, the only way I can get to this is maybe through a personal story, because I'm a diplomat and then I read I'm a social justice activist, but I started in banking. And I love the fact that I started in banking because it's about one thing. How to make sure that your client understands that this is good for him and her, and how to make her or him feel good about what they're doing with their money. We don't realize people are human. People want to sit down and go, hey, listen, we were able to take this money that we were using for so-and-so, repurpose it because we invested in a monitoring and evaluation system. And don't you know, I'm actually making more money. These communities are healthier. And this is not a foregone conclusion. We have to bring insurance into, I'm sorry it's an extended answer, but we have to bring insurance in. Most of us, if you're like me, you have to sit down and understand the principles by which insurance works. And once you understand the principle by which it works, you realize there's certain clauses and certain mechanisms that just cannot exist within a loan agreement or within a grant form or within a monitoring and evaluation implementation scheme. So the behavior is not just the people on the ground who you're trying to say, oh, you need to stop using coal, African farming, because it's not good for the planet, which is what we often do in a simplistic way, or you need to come away from this because of a moralistic view. We need to also understand the realities that are affecting and find ways to find the money that's there, unlock it, release it, it's there, right? Special drawing rights were there, billions of dollars of it, and we were able to advocate and unlock it so we could create new funds with better rules. We now have an implementation mechanism, and I will give my ambassador credit for this, that again comes out of a Barbados initiative. It's not Barbados alone, but Barbados in partnership, which has different rules. And so if I had more time, I'd like to sit here all day and tell people about the things that have happened, that can happen to release more money, and sit down and talk about the conversations that you can have with bankers and insurers to say, listen man, this thing can be good for your business. The problem is what? We have always been scientists and diplomats and social justice people and lawyers and politicians, and the planet is demanding us to be polyvocal and understand how these things, when you get next to a person like Kristen, I want to be able to speak to her so she understands and we can nod and we can get to that. When I get next to a banker and a scientist, I want to be able to say to him, listen, this thing can be interesting for you. This is what methane abatement can look like because the technology was just released.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stop.
Yeah, I think we have to. Thank you very much, Tonika. That was it's extremely important to contextualize that. So, no, thank you. I'm just aware of time, and I really want to bring it. I really want to have the opportunity for the audience to ask some questions about the technology. Helen, Johan, I had a list for you, but I think, in interest of time, we'll just go to the audience. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to share? A question about the technologies, its deployment, which you'd like to ask? If not, I can continue with one. No, we're all good? Okay, then I'd like to pivot back specifically to the technologies, and Johan, this is one for you. It was specifically on the 10 emerging techs, right? 9 of them were about mitigating human drivers. Only one of them was about diagnosis of our Earth system. A very ambitious, a very expensive one that's led by the European Space Agency and Luca Brocca on defining a digital twin of our Earth based on climate modeling and satellite data. It's worth 25 billion. It's a lot of money. Question for you is, given the needs of the hour, how much should we be investing in further understanding our Earth system? Should we be looking more at deployments of the ones that we know can actually buy us some time?
Well, it kind of connects to Tonica's point just at the end here, that we cannot continue having this kind of fragmented approach to the transition towards a safe and just landing within Earth's stability. There is no way that technologies by themselves, even in combined with the best policies and the best de-risking finance, can succeed without accountability. And the accountability today, whether we like it or not, needs to add up to the planetary scale. Remember that we're so deep into the crisis that we today know that we're bumping on the ceiling of hardwired biophysical processes that regulates the very stability and livability on Earth. I'm sorry to say, but that's the level we've reached. We've filled up all the space. There's no more atmosphere, there's no more ocean, there's no more trees, there's no more soil that we can simply consider being this infinite resource that we can continue exploiting without remaining within finite, scientifically defined budgets. And these budgets are here not to dampen or hold back on prosperity and equity. They're here to give us a chance at prosperity and equity. That's why I think, when you talk to really deep innovators, they'll tell you that the mother of real innovation is constraints. It's always been limits. And the boundaries set by science, where we need the Earth observation data, which gives us the monitoring ability to really, not only get precision, but also get high resolution across soils and biodiversity and marine systems, ice sheets, albedo, fundamental feedbacks in your system. We can have, a long discussion on this, but we can actually monitor the entire planet today, and we've come to a point where we can even quantify the safe boundaries. This is a tremendous help to accelerate the transition. But let me also say that there is an additional dimension why I think that initiative needs funding, which is that, admittedly, science still has a high degree of uncertainty ranges on several of the risks we're facing. If you just go around the wall you're sitting in front here, you'll see the large burning embers uncertainty ranges on the risk of crossing tipping points. So the Amazon basin is one example where climate science shows that the risk is somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius of warming. But if we transgress the boundaries of biodiversity, land, and freshwater, that level of tipping point probably goes down to between 1.5 and 2. I would argue that that is a warning enough for us to innovate and invest big way on de-risking investments in a safe climate future. But many actors, and definitely those in financial institutions, will come back to us and say, the uncertainty ranges are too large, we cannot work with this. The probability levels are not precise enough for us to do a really solid risk assessment that can guide not the millions, but the billions that we need. So I'm absolutely convinced that we need even more fundamental science on Earth observation in order to narrow in on the uncertainty ranges. Finally, take one example. If the AMOC would collapse, the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, it would be a catastrophe for the entire world. The uncertainty range is very wide. It's somewhere between a 1 to 10% likelihood of occurring within this century. For a catastrophic impact, any risk analyst would say that that's unacceptably high probability of occurrence. But it's still so wide that nobody's acting on it. I'm absolutely sure that if the Nordic ministers gathered here would know that it was almost like a certainty that the AMOC was shut down at, let's say, 2 degrees Celsius of warming, you would get a completely different scale action, because suddenly they would realize that this is like a don't look up moment. It's an asteroid on its way to hit Earth with, what did she say, Meryl Streep, a 98% likelihood. I think we need more precision to help the scaling of innovation and constraining the boundaries to help these technologies to go much, much faster and come to scale. So I think everything we've been talking about here kind of, it's like holding hands, really. And you need more diagnostic to support the de-risking, to get the technologies from the local level to the global level to really materialize.
Thank you very much, Johan. And I think that quite nicely wraps up this discussion. So I think I would like to have a final intervention down. Sorry for the feedback. Like my final intervention as we close up, and I'd like to start off with you, Helen. So 1 minute each. What is the one action you must believe must take place in the next 12 months to take these technologies from the report to real-world transformation, and who should lead it? So Helen, over to you.
So there are 10 very different technologies in this report. And so to make it more tangible, I'm actually going to build on what Johan was just saying around Earth observation and the hand-holding that's needed across these. So imagine over the next year if companies were to start using sensor data instead of self-reported data, because hyperspectral sensors can see things more than the human eye can see. And we can actually see methane, for example, from space. And we can measure and report on, I think, arguably a greater specificity than we get in some of the standard reporting tools. And so if we look at voluntary reporting, we look at mandatory reporting, and we look to move from tallying up what we think might be there to actually measuring what's happening. So let's use that as one example of how technology can tip us over from one way of doing things that we do now to taking us forward in another direction. And while I have the floor, I will also just tie together in the report, each of the technologies has a make or break section. In that section, the 3 topics addressed came through very strongly in this panel today of finance, policy, and equity. In terms of looking at each of them, in order for them to scale, in order for them to move from, they're out of the lab now, they're in nascent markets, but in order for them to scale, to make meaningful impact, each of those 3 elements is crucial and will be evolving very rapidly in the age of AI and in this sort of time of frequent change. So I would encourage, if you're looking through the report, to really look at those as well, thinking through this conversation today and how they will help us move forward.
Thank you very much, Helen. Bastian, over to you. The 1 minute overview.
I'm not going to have one, I've got 3, but I'll be in 1 minute. Insurance. I think one of the things we know about the way insurance interacts with technology is that it's actually very, very good at building confidence in using something that is not well known. And I think if we were to do that properly, we can get to a closer to a planetary scale. The second is co-design. We continue with technology to continue to assume that the inventor knows best, rather than the person actually using it knows best. And the third is the extent to which we understand that there are social technologies entangled with technical technologies, and we really need to try and bring these together. And that's true actually across all of these 10 technologies. How do they interlace with the social changes that we're trying to bring about? This is mine, it's from my hands.
Thank you.
I think that we should do something together. To expand, I think we should bring together the partners who need to be there. We need to define a set of projects. Let's say we had a set of projects between the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer. I'm not saying only small line and developing states or developing countries, but climate vulnerable spaces. Get those projects done and embed those principles from the beginning. Embed the principle of equitable access, make sure that there are no barriers to the finance and there are pools of money that can do it. And also monitor and evaluate in a way that makes the equitable access and the outcome and the ownership of the local community and the partnership and the sourcing of innovation and co-innovation from the local community a part of that. Just write these things and get them going. I think that if we just had a set, let's say a package of projects that we could monitor and evaluate in a certain amount of time, that's what we need to do. And I would say it has to be in the urgent area of methane abatement.
Johan.
It's a tricky one. Number one, I think we know that the most effective measure over the next 12 months to really accelerate innovation pathways for technologies would be a global price on carbon. $100 per ton of carbon dioxide across all sectors will unleash tremendous innovation and investment. We know we're not going to get that in the next 12 months, but I think it should be there on the table to recognize that the most efficient economic policy is that. The second is, I'm really impressed by what Ethiopia has done and deciding to forbid imports of internal combustion engine cars to simply accelerate the pathway away from, people losing their lives because of air pollution in Addis Ababa and beyond, and accelerate the pathway to the clean technology future. And they're really combining livelihoods, health, technology with hard policy. And if we can, just like Tony suggested, finding 10 countries that want to be in that club, the club of holding hands to speed these things up, I think that would be sending a very exciting signal to the world.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you to all of our panelists and Helen who's joined us online. Give them a round of applause. And I welcome you to download the report. It's the 10 Emerging Technologies for Planetary Health that's published with the World Economic Forum. And any questions afterwards, our panelists are still here. So thank you and have a good afternoon.